It started like so many quiet departures do, with a ritual. In the early light of a Thursday morning, Amelia Turner stood barefoot in the middle of her small Jackson apartment, surrounded by carefully laid-out gear. Everything had its place. Her backpack, a weathered blue Osprey, sat center stage, flanked by zip-locked food portions, a neatly folded map, her cook stove, her filter, and her camera. Not just any camera. Her Nikon D750. The lens cap clicked off with a soft snap as she inspected it one last time. To Amy, this wasn't just a trip. It was a pilgrimage. She had dreamed of this trail since childhood, the Paintbrush Canyon, Cascade Canyon Loop, one of the Teton's most rugged and beautiful routes. 4 days. 3 nights. 20 miles of raw mountain spine cutting through one of the wildest landscapes in America. She'd photographed pieces of it before, always from the edges. But this time, she wanted the heart of it. She wasn't a thrill seeker. Not a daredevil. She was the kind of person who believed the wild gave more than it ever took, if you approached it with reverence. And Amy did. Her apartment walls were covered in her photos, a moose at dawn beside Snake River, a sky pilot flower clinging to a cliff, ridgelines captured just as alpenglow kissed their peaks. Above those, maps, folded, pinned, scribbled on in pencil, lines that traced every hike she'd ever done. Now, she was ready to draw a new one. That morning, she started her usual ritual: water bottles filled, battery packs topped off, GPS checked, satellite messenger tested. She texted her mom, "Video call before I go?" And minutes later, Sarah Turner's phone lit up in Salt Lake City. The image on her screen was one she'd remember forever. Amy, beaming. Kneeling beside her gear like a proud artist with her tools. The blue of her pack catching sunlight through the window. "I've got everything," she said. "Tent, bag, food, first aid, bear spray, even extra socks." Sarah smiled. "You're something else. Promise me you'll check in every night?" Amy lifted the Garmin in reach and shook it in front of the screen. "Every night. Be safe." "I will. Love you, Mom." It was a call full of life. Of confidence. Of quiet joy. That would be the last time Sarah Turner saw her daughter alive. By 7:50 a.m. the next day, Amy's silver Subaru pulled into the String Lake Trailhead parking lot. The sky above the Tetons was a flawless blue. There wasn't a whisper of wind. The scent of pine and damp earth hung in the air like a promise. She parked in the far corner, where the early light spilled through the lodgepole pines and onto the gravel. She sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes lifted toward the ridgeline. Then she stepped out. Boots laced. Straps tightened. She checked her messenger one last time, then tucked it into her belt pouch, right beside her camera. An older couple, tourists from Ohio, were taking in the view when Amy approached them. She wore a pink tank top and hiking pants, her blonde hair tied back tight. She asked if they'd mind taking a photo of her with the Tetons behind her. The man, Gerald, smiled and obliged. She stood facing the camera, one hiking pole in hand, her pack snug against her back. Behind her, the cathedral group of peaks shimmered above the still waters of String Lake. She smiled, not the forced smile of someone posing, but a smile that reached her eyes. A moment later, she thanked them and moved toward the trailhead, sending the photo to her mom with a message that read, "Off I go. The mountains are calling. Weather is perfect. Talk to you Sunday night." Then, she disappeared into the trees. There were no signs of hesitation. No dramatic goodbye. Just the rhythmic sound of boots on dirt and the rustle of her pack as it settled into her shoulders. She moved with a quiet certainty, the same way she always had in the backcountry. And just like that, Amelia Turner was gone. The photo, that single moment captured on a stranger's phone, would become the most widely circulated image of her. A smiling young woman framed by jagged granite and clear sky, unaware that she was walking into a mystery that would haunt an entire nation. A photo taken in peace. Just hours before the silence swallowed her whole. Sunday night in Salt Lake City came on quiet feet. The sun dipped behind the Wasatch Mountains, casting long shadows across suburban streets. Inside a modest home on the edge of town, Sarah Turner sat on the couch, phone resting on her thigh, screen lit, but still dark in all the ways that mattered. Her daughter, Amy, was supposed to text by now. She always did. The plan was simple. 4 days. 3 nights. She'd be back out of the Tetons by late Sunday. And like every other time Amy hiked alone, she'd promised a message when she hit the trailhead on her return. But 7 p.m. came and went. Then 8 o'clock. By 9:00, Sarah was pacing. She tapped open the Garmin app again. Nothing. No check-in message. Still, she told herself, it's probably the battery. Maybe the GPS lost signal in the canyon. Maybe Amy camped an extra night with a group she met on the trail. She was like that, independent, but not reckless. Friendly. Capable. Sarah sat down, tried to watch the news, but her eyes kept drifting back to the phone. At 10:30, she texted. Let me know you're okay. Just want to hear from you. It showed a single gray check mark. Not delivered. By morning, sleep had barely come. The first light bled into the kitchen window as Sarah, now bleary-eyed and jumpy, brewed coffee she wouldn't drink. She tried again. Amy? You back yet? Still nothing. She left voicemails. Played them back to herself just to hear her own voice trying not to shake. By noon Monday, panic arrived. Not with a scream, but with a whisper. A crawling dread in the gut. The realization that all the logical reasons, the dead battery, the change of plans, weren't enough anymore. Amy wouldn't do this. Amy never just went dark. Sarah sat at the kitchen table and pulled up her browser. Teton County Sheriff's Office, missing hiker. She stared at the phone for what felt like an hour, thumb hovering over the call button. Then, finally, she pressed it. The dispatcher's voice was calm. Sarah's voice was not. She explained everything, the gear, the satellite check-ins, the route Amy had mapped, the Sunday return time. The dispatcher asked for Amy's name. Her description. Her vehicle. Sarah gave it all, every detail, her voice growing thinner with each word. When she mentioned the model and color of Amy's car, a silver Subaru Crosstrek, the dispatcher paused. Then spoke softly. We'll get someone out to String Lake Trailhead right away. A half hour later, a park ranger by the name of Tom Albright stood in front of Amy's car. It was still there. Exactly where it had been left 3 days ago. Dust had settled across the windshield. A folded map lay on the passenger seat. A coffee mug sat in the cup holder, half full. The car looked untouched, normal. And that, more than anything, made the air around it feel wrong. Albright walked to the metal trail register at the edge of the lot. He opened the weather-beaten lid and flipped through the sign-in sheets. There it was, written in tidy print. Turner, Amelia. Paintbrush Cascade Loop. 3 nights. Return, Sunday. But there was no sign out. No exit entry. No indication she'd ever come back down. Albright stepped away and keyed his radio. Dispatch, vehicle confirmed. No sign of hiker. Register confirms entry. No sign out. In Salt Lake, Sarah's phone rang. A voice on the other end said they'd located Amy's car. That search crews would begin an official response. That a team would be mobilizing first thing at dawn. Sarah Turner sank into the chair by the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting soft amber light across the floorboards. Inside, everything changed. Amelia Turner was no longer just her daughter. She was a file number. A trail map. A red pin on a ranger's board. She was missing. And somewhere, in the vast silence of the Tetons, a story had begun that no one yet understood. Dawn broke over the Tetons with a crisp clarity that felt indifferent to the fear now hanging in the air. At the Jenny Lake Ranger Station, the usual hum of radios and ranger chatter had been replaced by something sharper, the clatter of boots, rustling maps, the low drone of urgency in every voice. A name echoed through the morning, Amelia Turner. 24. Solo hiker. Experienced. Overdue. By 7 a.m., the Grand Teton Interagency Search and Rescue Team was mobilized. Helicopter rotors spun up against the rising sun as a lean, gray-haired ranger named Mike Connolly addressed the team. Her plan was Paintbrush Cascade Loop, he said, pointing to a red trail line on the map. 3 nights. Last known location, String Lake Trailhead. First night target, Holly Lake. Eyes locked on the board. Radios crackled. Then the team split, ground units went in both directions. Helicopters lifted off. And the search began. Above the ridgelines, the chopper sliced through the blue, scanning miles of untouched wilderness, granite spires, glacier-carved canyons, and the deep folds of alpine forest. Below, boots hit dirt. The ground crews ascended Paintbrush Canyon, step by grueling step, winding through steep switchbacks and shadowed undergrowth. Then, just past noon, something. A patch of muted green caught the sunlight through the trees. Tucked in a grove of firs near Holly Lake, partially shielded by brush, a tent. A dome-shaped model. Staked cleanly into the soil. Not collapsed. Not torn. It looked untouched. Too untouched. One of the rangers stepped forward and gently unzipped the flap. Inside, a sleeping pad lay neatly unrolled. A small, lightweight daypack sat just beside it. The pad wasn't crumpled. The fabric didn't show signs of panic or struggle. It looked like whoever set it up had just stepped away. But Amy wasn't there. They checked the daypack. Inside, an empty water bottle. A protein bar wrapper. A tube of sunscreen. That was it. No sleeping bag. No food. No camera. No Osprey backpack, the one Amy was so proud of. No boots. Nothing that made sense. Because if Amy had left camp for a short walk, she would have taken her daypack, not left it behind. And if she were moving camps, why leave the tent standing? It was a contradiction. A violation of backcountry logic. Something was wrong. A ranger keyed his radio. "We've got a tent. No subject. Camp's intact, but it doesn't add up." Command responded instantly, "Send in the dogs." Within hours, a helicopter dropped a K-9 team onto the ridgeline above. The lead dog, a seasoned German shepherd named Kaiser, was led to the tent's entrance. He sniffed, circled, then let out a low, vibrating whine, and took off. The handler followed, boots pounding behind him. But the dog didn't follow the trail. Instead, Kaiser cut hard left, away from the loop, straight into steep terrain, climbing a slope of loose rock and tangled willows. The search crew followed with increasing caution. The slope grew steeper, the footing more treacherous. This was not a direction a solo hiker would take lightly. It was steep, unstable, and led nowhere obvious. Then, half a mile later, Kaiser stopped. They found themselves in a dead zone. A boulder field tangled with deadfall. Granite slabs stacked at odd angles. The air was thin, still. Kaiser circled, sniffed, whined again. Then sat down, still. Silent. The scent had ended. The handler radioed in, breathing heavy. "We've hit a wall. The trail just ends. There's nothing beyond this point." Another voice replied, slow, unsure. "You mean it's lost?" "No," the handler said. "It's gone. It's like she vanished into the air." And in that moment, the vastness of the Tetons, their beauty, their scale, began to feel like something else entirely. Not a landscape, but a vault. One that had quietly, impossibly, swallowed Amelia Turner whole. The storm was still hours away when the ghost first appeared. 2 days into the search for Amelia Turner, investigators tracked down the last confirmed witnesses to see her alive, an older couple from Ohio, Eleanor and Gerald, who had been hiking near String Lake the morning Amy disappeared. They remembered her smile. Her pink tank top. How she'd asked for a photo with the mountains behind her. They said she seemed happy. Confident. Excited. But that wasn't all they remembered. As they made their way back down the trail, maybe 10 minutes after parting ways with Amy, they passed another hiker. Alone. Moving fast. And he wasn't like the others. Gerald described him as tall, wiry. Skin pale and drawn. His face sharp, gaunt. His eyes never met theirs. He didn't nod, didn't return their hello, just kept moving like they weren't even there. Eleanor added something else, he looked hard. Like someone who lives outside too long. He carried a military-style pack, faded and beat up. No identifying logos. No conversation. No sound except the dull thud of his boots on the trail. The memory sent a chill through the search command center. A sketch artist was brought in. The couple sat side by side, describing what they'd seen: cheekbones, sunken eyes, that blank, flat expression. By the time the drawing was finished, the room was quiet. It was the kind of face that didn't belong in the photos of smiling tourists and family vacation albums. It was the kind of face you might remember too late. The sketch was posted on bulletin boards and shared with local law enforcement. Rangers printed copies, tacked them to trail signs. But no one came forward with a name. He had no car. No campsite. No reservation. No one saw him arrive. No one saw him leave. He was a shadow. Online, he was quickly dubbed the Phantom of the Tetons. And without more to go on, that's all he was, a ghost, blurry and silent, hovering just outside the edge of certainty. While the search for Amy intensified, the weather changed. The morning had started clear, calm. But around midday, clouds began rolling in from the west, thick and gray, curling like smoke around the mountain peaks. The winds shifted. The rangers knew what was coming. In the high country, storms don't ask permission. Helicopters were grounded first. The wind buffeted their blades too violently. Then radio chatter picked up, ground teams started reporting temperature drops, gusts across the ridgelines, thunder echoing from deep inside the canyons. Mike Connolly, the lead ranger, made the call. All units pull back. No one stays past nightfall. The Tetons don't compromise. When the storms come, they come fast, and they come hard. By sunset, the peaks had vanished behind a wall of roiling clouds. Then, the sky cracked. Lightning forked down the mountainside, turning dusk into white daylight for an instant. The thunder that followed shook the ranger station. Rain came next. Cold. Relentless. Sheets of it, hammering trees, washing down switchbacks, turning dry slopes into slick death traps. And just like that, the mountains began to erase. Footprints vanished. Scent trails, gone. Any fragile clue left behind by Amy, any trace of where she might have turned, walked, climbed, it was being scrubbed away by nature itself. For 36 hours, the Tetons became a sealed vault. No search teams could safely enter. No dogs. No air support. Just wind, rain, and silence. The search, once urgent and methodical, was now on hold, held hostage by the same wilderness Amy had once loved. And somewhere in that vast storm, maybe hidden behind a boulder, beneath a fallen log, or halfway up a windswept ridge, the truth waited. Soaked. Silent. And getting harder to find with every passing second. When the search teams packed up and left, the Tetons didn't notice. The helicopters went quiet. The radios went dark. The command tents came down one by one. And just like that, the official search for Amelia Turner was over. They called it Limited Continuous Patrol. A cold, procedural phrase that meant, we're not looking anymore, unless something obvious shows up. But for one person, it was just the beginning. Mark Turner was a retired land surveyor. A quiet man. Measured. Methodical. He'd spent decades translating the messy contours of the earth into clean lines on a map. But when his daughter vanished, the map stopped making sense. The world she'd stepped into, the one he thought he understood, had swallowed her whole. And it refused to give her back. So Mark did something that made no financial sense and every emotional one. He sold the 10-acre parcel he'd been saving for his grandkids. Liquidated part of his retirement. He bought climbing gear. High-resolution satellite imagery. A truckload of topo maps. And every Friday morning, before the sun rose, he left Salt Lake City. The drive to Jackson was long and empty. But he made it every single weekend. He wasn't looking for answers anymore. He was looking for her. Mark's method wasn't heroic or cinematic. It was precise. Coldly rational. He didn't wander through forests hoping for a miracle. He turned the Tetons into a grid. He took the known trail, the paintbrush cascade loop, and broke the surrounding wilderness into quadrants. 1 square mile at a time. Drainages. Canyons. Tree lines. Sheltered rock shelves. Places the helicopters might have missed. Places the dogs might have skipped. Places no one else wanted to go. Locals started recognizing the old blue Ford pickup parked at obscure trailheads. Rangers passed him quietly in the pre-dawn light. Sometimes they offered him coffee. Sometimes they didn't say anything at all. They called him the Ghost Dad. Always alone. Always early. Always walking into the dark with a pack on his shoulders and a haunted look in his eyes. Mark didn't talk much to anyone anymore. But he kept a notebook, dozens of them. Each page was a record. Weather conditions. GPS coordinates. Elevation changes. Plant growth. Anything that broke the natural pattern. He wasn't just a father grieving. He was a surveyor still doing his job. Only now, he was mapping grief. His weekends were quiet rituals of pain. Pack the truck. Cross off one more square. Come home with nothing. Repeat. Some days he found animal bones. Once, a torn jacket sleeve, but not Amy's. Once, a shallow pit filled with wet pine needles that looked too clean, too deliberate. But every time, it was a dead end. Still, Mark didn't stop. He told himself that every empty quadrant was progress. That every patch of wilderness crossed off brought him one step closer. He knew, in his gut, that the Tetons were still holding her. Somewhere. Then, one night in late July, nearly a year since Amy had vanished, a photo appeared online. It was buried deep in a backcountry hiking forum. Just a casual post from a fly fisherman named Travis who'd been exploring an unmarked section of Cascade Creek. In the photo, the creek shimmered in late day light. And there, wedged between two rocks in the current, a single black hiking pole. Travis had pulled it free, wiped off the mud, and snapped a pic. He posted it under the caption, "Lost gear or something darker?" At first, it got little attention. Until someone in the comments zoomed in and realized, it wasn't just any pole. It was the exact make and model of the one Amy had been holding in her final photo. The textured grip. The scratched silver tip. It was hers. And just like that, the silence cracked. After almost a year of nothing, the mountains had finally given up a piece of her. It was a sign. Not an answer. But a sign. And for Mark Turner, it was all he needed. The grid wasn't just a theory anymore. Somewhere near Cascade Creek, maybe miles upstream, Amy had passed through. And Mark would be there again by morning. With a new map. And one less square to cross off. High above the tree line, where the air thins and the world grows quiet, Ranger David Chin moved like a shadow across the mountainside. It was late July, nearly a year since Amelia Turner vanished. And while most of the search efforts had long since faded into cold case files, David wasn't searching for her. Not officially. He was here for the birds. Chen was a veteran ranger, 15 years in the Tetons, but what truly drew him back season after season wasn't the badge. It was the eagles. Specifically, the golden eagles that nested high along the cliff bands of the upper basin. He tracked their nests, noted their migrations, monitored their young. He liked the solitude. The purity of watching something wild, untouched. Predictable in a way humans never were. That morning, the sun was already high when he scrambled up a loose scree slope to reach one of the known nesting sites, a rocky ledge halfway up a sheer wall of crumbling granite. He lifted his binoculars, braced them against his gloved hands, and scanned the cliffside. The nest came into view. Massive. A woven sprawl of branches, brush, and sun-bleached bones, a throne of nature balanced on a razor-thin ledge. He focused in, and then paused. Something was wrong. Amid the natural colors of branch and moss, there were two flashes of color that didn't belong. One red. One turquoise. Trash? Maybe. It happened. Even up here, wind and carelessness found ways to ruin the wild. A nylon wrapper, a faded bandana, Chen had seen it before. But these weren't wrappers. The red looked like fabric. Torn. Worn. The turquoise had the same texture he recognized from outdoor gear, not cheap plastic. He adjusted the lens. The red wasn't just a strip, it had stitching. Elastic banding. Chen frowned. Something clenched in his chest, deep and cold. This wasn't garbage. He lowered the binoculars and stared up at the ledge. The climb would be sketchy. Not impossible. But steep, unstable, and exposed. It wasn't something he'd normally risk just to clean a nest. But something in his gut had shifted. He couldn't shake the unease crawling beneath his skin. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Chen. I'm in the upper basin. Approaching nest site 12. Making a short climb. Just a heads up." A pause. "Copy that, Chen. Be careful up there." He clipped the radio to his vest, slung his binoculars over his shoulder, and began the ascent. The slope fought him. Loose gravel slid underfoot. Thin alpine grass gave way to crumbling rock. He moved carefully, methodically, testing every hold. His breath shortened as the altitude kicked in. Minutes later, he reached the ledge. Up close, the nest loomed in front of him, 5 feet wide, wild and chaotic, woven together from sticks, feathers, and something else. Chen crouched, his hand hovering just above the tangled edge. The turquoise was a shredded piece of nylon, maybe a stuff sack, or a rain cover. The kind backpackers used to protect their gear. But the red. He froze. It wasn't a bag. It wasn't rope. It was a pair of women's underwear. Dirty. Weathered. Mostly white, but with a distinct red trim at the waistband and leg openings. Faded, but unmistakable. He knew that color. He'd seen it in briefings. In photos pinned to corkboards during the search for Amelia Turner. Her Osprey backpack had red accent straps. This red was nearly identical. And just like that, he felt it. A certainty. This wasn't lost gear. It wasn't windblown trash. It was a piece of her. Chen stood up, his heart thudding in his chest. Not with exertion, but with dread. The eagles were scavengers. They didn't just hunt. They collected. If they'd found this, where had it come from? He pulled out his phone, hands trembling slightly now. He took photos from every angle, the nest, the fabric, the threads, the colors. He didn't touch anything. He knew better. This wasn't his job anymore. This was evidence. He pressed his radio again, voice tight. "Dispatch, this is Chen. I think I may have found something. Something related to the Turner case." Static filled his ears for a second. Then a voice responded, slower now. "Say again, Chen." He looked back at the nest, at the unnatural colors tangled in the sticks, the silent message perched above the wilderness. "This isn't trash," he said. "You need to get someone up here." He turned and looked out over the basin, at the endless green below. And somewhere, down in that silence, she was still there. The search returned quietly, no cameras, no press, no hopeful crowds. Just boots on the earth. This time, it wasn't a rescue mission. It was recovery. And it began in silence. 3 days after Ranger David Chen reported his discovery in the Golden Eagle nest, a specialized search team was dropped into the alpine basin beneath that ledge. Forensic anthropologists. High-angle SAR veterans. Cadaver dogs trained to smell death in places where even the wind forgets to go. They moved carefully across the slope, a raw, unforgiving stretch of high-altitude terrain scarred by rock slides and scattered deadfall. It was steep, unstable, and brutally quiet. The search grid was only 1 square mile. But every inch of it could hold a secret. The air was thin, sharp. Radios buzzed with low murmurs as the handlers gave quiet commands. The dogs swept side to side, noses low, tails stiff with purpose. One of them, a black Labrador named Odin, was the youngest of the team but already known for being uncannily accurate. He didn't bark. He never did. He just stopped. It happened mid-morning on day 3. Odin's paws slowed near a jagged cluster of boulders at the base of a scree slope. Thorny brush tangled up the gaps in the stone. At first glance, it looked like nothing, just another pocket of alpine chaos. But Odin paused. Sniffed. Then he sat. His handler froze. Everyone knew what that meant. The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Alana Rios, stepped forward. She dropped to one knee beside the dog, brushing away the top layer of leaves and pine needles. There was no visible body. But the ground was wrong. The soil sat lower in one section. Compressed. Disturbed. There were rocks, but they didn't look like they'd tumbled there naturally. They looked placed. Covered. She pressed her palm flat to the ground. Cold. Still. Waiting. "Start here," she said softly. Trowels scraped dirt. Brushes worked in circles. No one spoke. After 40 minutes, someone's blade tapped something that didn't sound like stone. They cleared more soil. A patch of blue fabric appeared first, faded, but unmistakable. A technical hiking shirt. Torn along one sleeve, soaked with a year's worth of weather and silence. Then, bone. A curved ridge. A human skull. The work stopped for a moment. Everyone stepped back. The grave was shallow, barely 2 feet deep. As they cleared around it, the rest of her skeleton came into view, fragile and partially scattered by time and scavengers. But enough remained to identify her. Amy Turner had been found. Her blue shirt matched the one she wore in that final photo, the one her mother had framed beside her nightstand. The one that had become the symbol of the search. A smile against a mountain backdrop, now unraveling under a brushstroke of dirt. The remains were documented, photographed, and gently lifted from the ground. Placed in sterile containers. Loaded into a chopper with reverent silence. The helicopter blades thundered as it lifted off, a coffin of wind carrying her away from the mountain that had hidden her for nearly a year. At the county morgue, the autopsy began. Dr. Rios, the forensic anthropologist, examined the skull first. The fracture was unmistakable, a single, powerful impact to the left side of the cranium. Sharp edges. No signs of healing. It hadn't happened from a fall. It hadn't happened by accident. This had been deliberate. And then came the other evidence, far worse. Fractures in the ribs. DNA recovered from trace fibers still tangled in the waistband of her shorts. Indicators no one wanted to believe, but couldn't ignore. Amelia Turner had not gotten lost. She hadn't slipped. She had been attacked. She had been assaulted. And then she had been killed. The wilderness hadn't claimed her by chance. Someone had taken her. Left her in the earth. Covered her with stone. And walked away. The Tetons had hidden the truth for 11 months. Now, the mountain had given her back. And for the first time in nearly a year, the mystery was no longer where Amy Turner had gone. It was who had taken her there. The revelation of Amy Turner's death hit the public like a thunderclap. This wasn't just a hiker lost to the elements. It was a murder. Suddenly, every assumption was up for re-examination. And one image, in particular, returned with terrifying clarity. The sketch. The gaunt man on the trail. The one who didn't make eye contact. The one who carried the faded military-style pack. At the time, he had been just a footnote. A strange passerby. Now, he was a suspect. The only one. Teton County investigators re-released the composite drawing, this time not as a person of interest, but as the potential killer. The sketch ran on local news, social media, true crime forums. And that's when the call came in. Not from a detective. Not from another hiker. But from a woman working the front desk at a low-budget motel in Pinedale, Wyoming, about an hour south of Jackson. Her name was Brenda. She was folding towels behind the desk when the news segment played on the little TV mounted above the lobby coffee station. When the sketch appeared, she froze. That face. She'd seen it. He stayed at her motel the previous summer. Kept to himself. Always paid cash. Said he was working construction. Never once used a credit card. Never made eye contact. She pulled out the guest ledger. His name was Robert Frazier. And she remembered one more thing, something that chilled her as she said it aloud. He checked out the same week that girl went missing. Just left. No warning. That was all the investigators needed. A name. With that single clue, the investigation exploded forward. A task force traced Frazier's background. It wasn't easy. He had no social media. No current driver's license. No tax records. His juvenile file was sealed, but a quiet phone call confirmed what many feared: he had a violent past. Assault. Possibly worse. His adult life was a ghost trail, moving state to state, working cash jobs in ranching and construction. Wyoming, Idaho, Colorado. Always in remote areas. Always alone. But now, they had a lead. Cross-referencing employment records and checking in with labor contractors eventually pointed them to a ranch outside Billings, Montana. He was there. Living in a trailer on the edge of a cattle property. And this time, the FBI moved fast. At dawn, federal agents and local deputies rolled through the gravel access road in a convoy. They moved in tight formation, weapons drawn. Frazier was taken without incident. He didn't run. Didn't argue. Just stood still. Face blank. His expression, the same as the sketch. Agents searched his trailer, then the dusty tool shed beside it. And inside, under a broken table covered in old rags and rusted tools, they found a heavy military-style footlocker. Secured with a thick padlock. They cut it open. Inside was a Predator's time capsule. 3 driver's licenses. All from women who had disappeared in different states. Small pieces of jewelry. Locks of hair tied with string. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a stained white t-shirt, was a camera. A Nikon D750. The serial number was still intact. And it matched Amy's camera. Her most prized possession. Recovered from the footlocker of a man no one even knew existed, until now. Robert Frazier had a face. He had a name. But no one yet knew the depths of what he'd done. Only that Amy Turner had crossed his path. And paid the price. At the FBI Forensics Lab in Denver, agents placed the Nikon D750 gently onto a stainless steel table. It was scuffed, cold, weathered by time and distance, but still intact. Inside, the memory card was still seated, miraculously preserved. They inserted it into a secured terminal. The screen blinked to life. What followed changed everything. The first images were familiar. Mountains glowing in morning light. Alpine lakes like mirrors. Wildflowers caught mid-bloom. Amy's work, full of awe, full of peace. They looked exactly like the photographs that once covered her apartment walls. And then, the tone shifted. The angles changed. One photo showed Amy from behind, hiking, unaware. In the next, she's smaller. Distant. The frame shaky, taken from higher up. Hidden. And then another. Closer now. And closer still. Each image a slow approach. She was being watched. Someone had stalked her. Carefully. Silently. Capturing her every movement from the trees, from the rocks, from the shadows. Frame after frame, taken from just far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to know, this wasn't random. It was hunting. Then came the last set of photos. They were not Amy's. They were his. And they were horrifying. Amy on the ground. Her face a mask of fear. Her arms scraped, reaching. The next, her unconscious. The next, worse. Images that will never be shown to the public. Images that no one should have the stomach to describe, but that told investigators everything they needed to know. It wasn't just proof of guilt. It was a confession in pictures, each one documenting a timeline of brutality, the ambush, the struggle, the assault, the killing. The final image was the most chilling of all. A freshly covered patch of earth. Stones laid carefully. The same shallow grave the recovery team had found nearly a year later. The photos spoke louder than any words ever could. And yet, they still needed one thing, for him to speak. They brought Robert Frazier into the interrogation room. He sat there, motionless. Hands cuffed. Eyes blank. He didn't ask why he was there. He already knew. 2 agents entered. One FBI. One from Teton County. They didn't yell. They didn't press. They placed a manila folder on the table. Slowly opened it. And laid the photographs down, one by one. They said nothing. Amy's landscapes. Then her. Then the stalking. Then the terror. Fraser's eyes tracked each image. For the first time since his arrest, his jaw tightened. His breathing changed. Barely. But enough. When they reached the final photo, the grave, they stopped. Silence. 7 full minutes passed. No one moved. Then, in a voice low and cold, he spoke. "That's me." He didn't deny it. Didn't flinch. The agent leaned forward, careful, quiet. "Why her?" Fraser didn't hesitate. She shouldn't have been alone. And just like that, it all fell into place. Over the next 2 hours, Fraser walked them through what he'd done. Not with shame. Not with tears. But with surgical precision. He admitted to following Amy from the trailhead. Watching her set up camp. Waiting until she was alone, vulnerable, before striking. He described every step of the attack. The disposal. The decision to take her camera, not as a souvenir, he claimed, but because it had his face on it. And when asked if this had happened before, he didn't answer. He just smiled. It wasn't long before investigators connected the dots. The driver's licenses found in his footlocker? 2 other missing women, one from Colorado, another from Idaho. Both hikers. Both young. Both vanished without a trace. Until now. Amy Turner's case had unlocked something far bigger. A serial predator. A trail of pain stretching across 3 states. And a monster. Who had finally been seen. The courtroom was silent. Not with confusion, but with finality. Robert Fraser sat motionless as the judge read the sentence. Life in prison. No parole. No mercy. The words carried the weight of every scream that never made it out of the canyon. In the gallery, Mark and Sarah Turner sat side by side. Hands clasped. Eyes fixed on the man who had destroyed their world. But there was no satisfaction. No vindication. Just gravity. The kind that pulls you under and never lets go. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked what they felt. Mark answered with a single sentence. We got justice. But that's not the same as peace. For other families, though, Amy's case had brought answers. The IDs found in Fraser's footlocker led investigators to 2 more women, victims who had vanished in the same silent way. Their remains were recovered. Their names were spoken again. And for a moment, in the midst of horror, the truth lit up corners long thought lost. But for Mark and Sarah, there was still a space that no sentence could fill. It had been just over a year since Amy walked into the Tetons and never came back. Now, they were here again. The mountain stood unchanged, jagged and proud beneath the blue Wyoming sky. But for those who knew, they would never look the same. Family, friends, rangers, and strangers stood at a windswept overlook above Jenny Lake. Below, the peaks reflected in the still water like ghosts. Behind them, a wooden box, hand-carved from reclaimed cedar, sat on a simple table. Amy's ashes. Mark stepped forward. He looked smaller than he used to. Not older, exactly, just weathered. He held something in his hands. Not a speech. Just a photograph. Amy, smiling. Her Nikon slung over one shoulder. The Tetons behind her, golden in the morning light. He cleared his throat, and for a second, the wind was the only sound. She came here for beauty, he said. Not for fear. Not for violence. She came to capture light. He looked at the people gathered, at his wife, standing quietly beside him. Let that be what stays. Not the ending. Not the pain. The beauty. They opened the box. The ashes rose into the wind, caught in a burst of sunlight that spilled across the peaks like something divine. The crowd stood still as the breeze carried her into the sky she loved. There were no bagpipes. No choir. Just the quiet hush of people remembering a girl who saw the world more clearly than most. And then, a sound. Not from the crowd, but from a camera. Someone, no one's sure who, pressed the shutter. A single click echoed across the granite, bouncing through the valley like a whisper. One last photo. Not of her. But for her. The light caught the edge of the overlook. The clouds parted. And for a brief, perfect moment, it looked like Amy had gotten her sunrise after all.